Okay, so you're building a budget watch collection and you've really fallen in love with mechanical watches, automatic watches, and you love chronographs, and you've got this crazy idea that you want to put a budget mechanical chronograph into your collection. Well, believe it or not, that's actually not so unattainable. In fact, there's one mechanical chronograph movement that is now being widely used in a lot of micro brands, and that is the Chinese manufactured Seagull ST19 chronograph movement. And if you're really on a budget, there's a lot of Chinese brands that are using this movement that you can pick up for right around $200, which is a pretty crazy price to get such a cool movement. And today we're going to look at not just one, but two watches that use this movement and kind of do a little bit of comparison between them. We're going to be checking out the RedStar 1963 and the Pierre Paulin from Merkur. Let's take a look. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back to Just the Watch, the budget watch collecting channel. And today we're talking about mechanical chronographs. I've got two great mechanical chronographs in to take a look at. One of them is one that I purchased for the Watch of the Month a while back, the RedStar version of the Seagull 1963 kind of homage. It's a 42mm Panda dial with a sapphire crystal. And then Merkur was kind enough to give me one of their Pierre Paulin Panda dial chronographs. Now this one uses the same movement. It also has a Panda dial layout, but it's a 38mm. It uses an acrylic crystal, and it has a really different styling than the Seagull 1963 style of the RedStar. So big thanks to Merkur for providing the Pierre Paulin. That is one that I do get to keep, so full disclosure there. However, the RedStar, again, is one that I purchased myself. Finally, I do want to mention that this is going to be part of a double review that I'm doing with Shane over at Relative Time. He also has the Pierre Paulin, and he's going to be doing a review releasing at the same time as this one. So as soon as you're done watching my video, make sure you head over to check out his over on his channel, and I will link to that up there and down below in the description. Okay, now with all that out of the way, I want to start by talking a little bit about the Seagull ST19 movement that powers both of these watches. Now this is a movement that has a really interesting and kind of cool history. It's a movement that was originally designed in Switzerland by a Swiss company, but then they sold all of the parts and the manufacturing equipment to Seagull, which is a Chinese company, I believe back in 1961. And since then, the Seagull Watch Company, which is China's kind of premier watch movement manufacturer and watch company, has been producing this movement. Currently, this movement is used not only in Chinese brands, but also in a number of micro brands. Both Laurier and Baltic both use it in some of their sort of higher-end chronograph watches. And those ones, I think, retail around the $500-600 mark. The ones that we're going to be looking at today, both of these cost $229 each, so significantly lower. So about the cheapest you're going to find a mechanical chronograph watch. But again, the movement that is used in these is actually a pretty cool movement. Let me tell you a couple of things that I really like about this movement. This is a mechanical movement, so it's not automatic, so there's no rotor to obstruct the view. You can really see all of the inner workings of the chronograph movement, which is really cool. You know, if you're really spending some time staring at it and studying it, you can actually watch the minutes tick by on the chronograph. I'm glad that I was able to get two watches with this movement in. Both of them were very accurate. I was getting about plus 7.5 seconds, plus 8 seconds a day on the two of them, so pretty comparable there, and I think, really within an acceptable range for a movement of this caliber and this price range. This is a 21,600 beats per hour movement, which means that the seconds hand beats at 6 times per second, which is a little bit mismatched because on the dial markings, they've got the chronograph hand printed at 1/5 of a second increments. So it doesn't quite line up to those increments on both of these watches, but pretty close. On either case, you are going to be able to tell, on fractions of a second by looking at the chronograph hand on the main dial. Another interesting thing about this movement is that the chronograph minutes counter actually jumps by the minute. So it doesn't advance to the next minute until the chronograph sweep gets all the way around and makes a full rotation, and then it will jump all at once to the next minute. This one gives you a 30-minute counter for the chronograph. But having it only recording 30 minutes actually makes it easier to read because you've got bigger gaps between the numbers and everything's just a little bit larger on that tiny dial. So it's actually very legible. And again, with that sort of jumping minute hand, it's very easy to tell the number of minutes that have gone by. Obviously, this being a true mechanical chronograph, you're also getting a very nice tactile feel on the pushers. It's really cool to be able to feel the chronograph engage as the gear slides into place and it begins to, count the seconds going by, and then also getting that really fast flyback when you reset it. Also pretty cool. The ST19 is a mechanical movement, so it's not automatic, which means that you have to wind it, otherwise it will wind down. So you're going to be winding it, every other day or so. It has a 40-hour power reserve, and I think a lot of that depends on how much you use the chronograph. So if you do not use the chronograph at all, both of mine ran for 49 hours. I had one where I just left the chronograph running, and the chronograph will continue to run nonstop until you stop it. It will only track 30 minutes at a time, but it will just keep going around. So after it counts 30 minutes, it'll just start counting another 30 minutes after that until you stop it. So if you forget to stop it, it will continue to use the chronograph and continue to use some of your power reserve. If you allow it to run completely all the time nonstop, I only got about 36 hours. But again, that's much more important on a mechanical watch because it will not wind itself on the wrist. You do have to wind it after the power reserve gets low. So it's best just to basically wind it once a day and then you don't have to worry about it. All right, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and introduce you to our two challengers today. First off, we have the RedStar Pilot's Chronograph, and this is an homage of the Seagull 1963 Pilot's Chronograph. So the Seagull Watch Company manufactured a chronograph for the Chinese military back in 1963. RedStar and a lot of other Chinese companies now have come out with sort of homages of that, where they're basically reissuing it, but it is not actually manufactured by the Seagull Watch Company. It is using the Seagull movement inside of it, but the watch itself is manufactured by a different manufacturer. And in this case, with this RedStar version, they've taken some additional liberties. They've increased the size to 42 millimeters, they've thrown a sapphire crystal on it, and they've turned it into a Panda dial. It comes on a red and black NATO strap, and you have just a tiny bit of lume on the hands. And the second watch we're going to take a look at today is the Pierre Paulin, which is manufactured by Merkur. I just reviewed one of their watches, a Seiko Alpinist homage, a few months back, and I was really impressed at the attention to detail that they put into that one. I've been equally impressed with the attention to detail put into this one here. Now, the Pierre Paulin is not an homage of the 1963 Seagull 1963 Pilot's watch. This is much more of like a driving chronograph or a sports chronograph. It has more of that feel to it, but it has a very vintage aesthetic to it. This one clocks in at 38 millimeters with a very high domed acrylic crystal, giving it, again, a very vintage look to it. Also, this one comes on a really kind of cool suede leather strap, and it has a surprisingly good amount of lume. It's not great lume, but it's surprisingly effective for what you're offering and significantly better than the lume on the RedStar. Anyways, with that said, let's go ahead and jump in and take a closer look at both of these watches. Okay, so I got the RedStar 1963 here on the left and the Pierre Paulin over here on the right, and you can instantly see the size difference here between the 42 millimeter RedStar and the 38 millimeter Pierre Paulin. At first glance, they do look very similar. These are both Panda dial chronographs. They both have the same movement inside, but there are a lot of differences. So let's go ahead and take a look at the RedStar first, and then we'll swap over to the Pierre Paulin in a minute here. So like I said, this RedStar is kind of an homage to the original Seagull 1963 Pilot's Chronograph, but it has been modified. It's a much bigger case. It's been changed from the champagne dial to a Panda dial, which I like. I opted for this one because I like a Panda dial chronograph, and I thought this was kind of a cool looking one with the mechanical movement inside. Let's go ahead and get that mechanical movement running. Nice solid tactile feel on the pusher there. So one of the things I really like about this is the indices. These are applied indices. You've got Arabic numerals at 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So on the even numbers, and that allows you to have the chronograph subdials in there without really throwing the symmetry off too much. But even the little arrow markers that mark the odd numbered indices are still really well done, and they look beautiful on the watch. I also really like that red second hand. I think it just gives it a really nice pop of color. However, the rest of the handset I'm not terribly impressed with. It seems fairly standard and a little bit difficult to read, especially the chronograph hands are a little bit hard to read in certain lighting. If you can catch the light right so they reflect pretty well, but in other lighting they sort of just blend into the background. Around the very edge of the dial, you are getting a chronograph's seconds track so that you can track the seconds down to 1/5 of a second. The RedStar features a domed sapphire crystal, which is fairly high. Gives you a nice little bit of distortion on the watch face at extreme angles. And it's nice to have that high scratch resistance on there. It's one of my favorite features about this particular watch. The case, however, is very plain, and let me go ahead and take it off the strap so that you can kind of see a little bit better what it looks like. So first off, it is an all polished case. There's no brushing on here, so it picks up fingerprints very easily. And you know, I think for a pilot's watch, having all polish is not really the best match. You'll also notice that the case shape here kind of starts out very wide at the top and then slopes down. I believe that's to hold this movement. This is a fairly small movement that it has inside. So rather than putting a spacer in there to make it fit the case better, they actually just had the case drop down in size to fit the movement down in there, which is a very functional way to handle it, but I don't know, I don't really necessarily like the look of that. Also, you know, these are quick release spring bars. I put these on myself. I'm not sure where the original spring bars came with, but they just come with standard spring bars. One of my least favorite things about the case is the lugs. They're just kind of very unelegant. They're just kind of these blocks that sort of just jut straight out from the side of the case. And overall, I feel like the case itself just looks a little bit on the cheap side. It is full stainless steel, but it's very plain and doesn't feel like there's been a whole lot of care put into it. But the case is something you hardly notice. You look at this watch, you see that Panda dial, you see the beautiful indices, just the striking layout, and then you're going to really be appreciating that see-through case back on the back and being able to look into that just gorgeous looking chronograph movement inside of it. So I think the sort of uninspired case shape is something that you can forgive on this watch. But let's go ahead and contrast that with the Pierre Paulin. So we've just been talking about case finishing. Let's go ahead and check out the case finishing on the Pierre Paulin first. And you can see that it is much nicer. So first off, you've got a very nice radial brushing on the top of the lugs there, and then that transitions to a high polish on just the side of the case. So that's a really beautiful transition right there. And then also the lugs are just much more elegant. They're very slender. They have a nice curve to them coming off of the case. And the overall just design and integration into the case is much smoother. You can see that the case is made in a couple of different sort of layers and steps. We've got this sort of mid case that has a thin portion there, but then you've got the case back and then the sort of bezel and then the crystal, and everything's kind of stepping one on top of the other. And you'll notice that there is this kind of extra step in there as well that also is very interesting and kind of cool looking. So overall, I think it's just a much nicer case than the RedStar has. Another main difference is that this one has an acrylic crystal. And one of the benefits of having an acrylic crystal is that you can usually make it much higher. And it gives a really kind of cool distortion as well, being that high. There's a little bit less reflection as well off of the acrylic crystal as the sapphire, so that's also nice. But obviously the main downside to an acrylic crystal is that it's going to scratch much easier than any other type of crystal. So I expect this to pick up scratches fairly easily, especially being this high of a dome and with nothing to protect it. However, surprisingly, it hasn't really picked up any scratches yet that I've noticed, and I have worn this out and about a number of times. So it wasn't as bad as I expected. I did actually go out and buy a tube of Polywatch in anticipation of having to buff out the scratches for review, but I haven't actually had to do it. But I really love the way the crystal looks. It's just got a really beautiful kind of distortion and look to it, and that really high domed is very striking as well. Also, I much prefer the handset that they've used on here, especially for the hour and minute hand. They're thicker, they're easier to see, and they've got a lot more lume on them as well. The second hand is a white second hand, which doesn't stand out very well. Unfortunately, that part is a little bit hard to read. However, since they've done a black ring around the outside of the dial, you can actually read the second hand there very easily. You get a contrast there where it kind of counts. This one also has a tachometer on that, which is, you know, kind of cool to have, especially for more of sort of a racing style chronograph. But what they did do nicely is that the registers for the minute, chronograph minute, and the running second hand are in white, so they contrast very well against the black dial. So they're much easier to read these than on the RedStar. The applied indexes are also really beautiful on this watch. You get some nice depth to them and some nice faceting. And overall, there's just a great level of quality and finishing for a watch in this price range. Dimensions on the Pierre Paulin, you're getting a 38mm diameter case, 18mm lug openings, which is a little bit of a pain, so it's a very small strap, and I don't have a lot of 18mm straps to try swapping it around with. But I think 18mm is proportionally a good size to go with on a small watch like this. I think it looks nice. It's just, you know, not as there's just not as many 18mm straps out there as there are 20mm straps. And then you're getting a 47mm lug to lug on here. So overall, this is just a really beautiful little watch for $230. I've had two Merkurs in to check out so far for review, and I've been very impressed with both of them. So I think they're doing a really good job as a Chinese kind of micro brand out there, putting out some really interesting pieces. Now you can pick up both of these watches for around $229, and I will leave links to them down below. I believe I have a discount code for the Merkur one as well, so that'll actually knock it down, I believe, even lower than the cost of the RedStar one. So let's go over again the main differences between these two models. First off, obviously, is the size. The Merkur comes in at 38mm, the RedStar comes in at 42. However, you can find almost the exact same watch as the RedStar at the 38mm size if you prefer that. Now, for my size wrist, a 42mm watch tends to wear better, but I also do like the way that the 38mm looks on my wrist. It does look small to my eye, but it has kind of a classic vintage look. So that's really going to be down to personal preference as far as size goes. A second difference is the crystal used on the two of these. The Merkur uses an acrylic crystal, which surprisingly has held up fairly well. I haven't really gotten any scratches on it. However, I still prefer sapphire, and the sapphire crystal on the RedStar is fairly nice. But in general, I think the Merkur is giving you a better product. The loom, for one, is significantly better on the Merkur. Not only are the hands loomed, they are loomed much stronger than the hands on the RedStar, but also on the Merkur, you're getting little loom pips around at all of the 12 indices. So certainly not like a dive watch, but you are going to get some good functionality out of that. The loom on the RedStar is basically useless. It'll last for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and then it's gone. Likewise, the finishing on the Merkur is significantly better than the RedStar. The case on the RedStar is not very appealing. It's all polished. It's very kind of blocky and unelegant. It's got kind of an odd shape as well. And you can tell that they didn't put a lot of thought into the aesthetics of the case. Is more just a functional case. The lugs in particular are kind of ugly. They're just sort of these big blocks that sort of stick out of it. Now, it's not a bad case. It's comfortable on the wrist, and you don't really notice it because the watch is primarily all dial. And again, you don't really notice it until you compare it to something. And when I did compare it to this Merkur Pierre Paulin, the finishing was much better. You're getting some very nice brushing on it, especially some radial brushing across the top with polished sides of it. And then also the lugs are just way more elegant. They're very nicely curved and cut out, whereas the RedStar one, you know, they've got that dial, they've got the sapphire crystal, they've got the chronograph movement inside of it, and they kind of seems like they just said, well, that's good enough. We can just kind of throw whatever case we want in there. However, it was really nice to see Merkur kind of going the extra mile and offering at the same price a significantly better case finishing and case design. The same can also be said for the strap that was included in both of these watches. The Merkur gives you a very nice suede leather strap, whereas, again, the RedStar, it's kind of a throwaway, cheap NATO strap. And the last point of comparison I would want to make is with the movement in the RedStar. I did actually have some problems with it. First of all, I was unable to stop the chronograph when it reached 59 seconds. So you can see the watch when it starts getting close to 59 seconds, the minute counter is getting ready to push over. And I was kind of curious what would happen if I tried to stop the time in a way that would interrupt that. And sure enough, on the Seagull 1963, when I did that, the second hand would jump backwards about a second or two, making it basically impossible to stop the chronograph second hand between 59 seconds and a minute. Now, interestingly enough, I did not have that problem on the Pierre Paulin version. So I don't know what the difference is between the two movements, but that is something that, yeah, was interesting, that with the Pierre Paulin, it was able to continue to function and stop even in between that last second in the sweeping chronograph register. The other problem I had with the RedStar one is that at least twice when I was testing it, while the chronograph was running, the watch would completely stop. Like it would stop keeping time, everything would just stop. And I would have to kind of stop the chronograph and start it again, and then after do it. And I didn't notice that until like 5 or 10 minutes had passed. So I'd look at my watch and it had stopped and the time would stop keeping and the chronograph had stopped running. And that was, yeah, kind of alarming. But, you know, other than that, it's worked most of the time, but that was also a little bit unnerving. Now again, I don't know if this is a problem with the ST19 movement, if this is just, you know, the batch that they got, or if this is something that is peculiar to RedStar, or if certain manufacturers do a better job of preparing the movement before they put in the watch. I can't vouch for any of that. All I can tell you guys is the experience on these particular two watches that I got, and the one in the Merkur seems to be running much better, and I have more confidence in that movement than the one in the RedStar. And so in the final results, I'm a little bit torn. I think the RedStar one is a more appropriate size for my wrist, that 42 millimeter, and I also really like a sapphire crystal. Both of those features are very important to me, and they would generally lead me towards that one. However, having the Merkur in hand, I really admire the craftsmanship in that one, and it kind of makes me like the RedStar one less because of that, because I see that the Merkur one, I feel like they are offering you more for your money, even though you have to make some of those trade-offs where for me it's a smaller watch, it's got an acrylic crystal, and then also it has 18 millimeter lugs, which makes finding straps for it a little bit more difficult. I don't really have many 18 millimeter straps. I have a lot of 22 millimeter straps. So for just the kind of sheer fun factor with the larger size, I can, you know, mix and match a lot easier than I can with this smaller 18 millimeter Pierre Paulin. But I would say that the Pierre Paulin is a better watch than the RedStar. So yeah, that's basically how I'm going to leave this. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think of these two watches, of the ST19 movement in particular, and if you've tried any of the other sort of ST19 movement powered watches out there, because again, there's a pretty large variety. Let me know what your favorite one is. But yeah, as always, love to hear from you guys. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. It's great to talk to you, and looking forward to hearing from you guys in the comments. I'll see you later. Bye.